My name is Alara Caldwell. I'm 72 years old, and my entire life I've earned everything through steady, quiet work. That night, in an upscale restaurant in Beverly Hills, I was celebrating my birthday with a small group. I wore a champagne-colored dress I'd gifted myself after decades of saving and putting off indulgences. It cost $3,000 and more than luxury. It was a reminder that I still knew how to celebrate life. The warm lights, the discreet murmur, the crystal clinking in toasts. Everything seemed calm. Until I saw my son, Landon, approach with a glass of red wine in hand and that grimace I knew from his childhood. When something inside him buzzed like a trapped wasp, I looked up to tell him I was glad to see him there. I didn't get the chance. The wine hit my chest like a bucket of water, running down the silk in red threads and chilling my skin. I heard the table's breath cut short all at once, and then the phrase that split me in two, "Now you look as cheap as you really are." His voice, clear, without a shred of shame. Tatum, my daughter-in-law, smiled with delight and clapped her hands lightly, as if applauding a well-executed trick. It was an instant that lasted an eternity. I felt the temptation to scream, to reproach life for putting me there, soaked and on display for everyone. But I'm not one to make a scene. I learned that the hard way. I swallowed, breathed deeply, and smiled coldly. Inside, something snapped with a dry crack. Today, it's over. Napkins didn't remove the red. The hostess discreetly brought a shawl. Some diners looked down, others, curious, fixed their eyes on us as if watching a play. Landon sat down with the ease of someone who believes the world owes him. Tatum took his hand, proud of her little fire. I thought of all the times I'd opened my wallet for the last time, the late rents, the school bills, the beach vacations paid with my emergency card. I thought of the girl I was, taught to swallow bitterness and smile. No more. I asked for the check without trembling. I complimented the chef on the dessert I didn't even taste. I bid farewell to the guests with my usual courtesy. In the bathroom, I looked in the mirror, the ruined dress. Yes, but my head held high. I walked home with my chest out, that stride you learn when you decide not to let go of your dignity. I opened the door, set my purse on the table, turned on the lamp. I picked up the phone, dialed the bank, and with the same voice I'd used to dictate poems in exams, I requested to cancel the additional card in Landon's name for emergencies. They said the emergency was me. Upon arriving home, still with the stained dress hanging on the coat rack like evidence of a crime, I sat at my desk. The lamp illuminated that corner where I'd spent so many nights grading exams, writing reviews, and organizing papers. I opened the first file cabinet and began pulling out yellowed receipts, folded invoices, printed transfers that I'd kept, like someone collecting pieces of a story I never wanted to tell. There were the payments for late rents more than $10,000 over 5 years. Always with the same plea from Landon. "Mom, the landlord wants to evict us. Help us just this month." A month that repeated itself over and over. Also, the tuition for the kids. Amounts I covered because I couldn't bear the idea of my grandchildren being pulled out of the private school where they'd been enrolled. And how could I forget that check for the car, $17,500 plus the annual insurance and gas they never reimbursed? All because Landon claimed he needed it for a job that never took off. I stared at those cold numbers that were, in reality, the footprints of my exhaustion. I, Alara Caldwell, 72 years old, retired as a literature professor at UCLA, had sweated every dollar. I didn't inherit fortunes or have a husband to support me. I saved with discipline what my classes, published articles, and reading workshops in underserved neighborhoods left me. Every coin was stored with the patience of an ant and given away with the naivety of a dove. I added them up mentally. With a heavy heart, more than $75,000 invested in rescuing a son and daughter-in-law who only knew how to open their hands, never their souls. I felt a burning in my eyes, but I didn't cry. Not anymore. That night, I understood that compassion without limits turns into slavery. I closed the file cabinets, stacked them on the table like bricks in a wall. I caressed them for a moment and stood up with a strange, almost new calm. As I reviewed those papers, I heard my own voice say, softly but firmly, tomorrow, at 7:50, everything will change. The sun was just peeking over the buildings when I heard the insistent ring of my cell phone. I looked at the clock, 7:50 on the dot. I answered without haste, with the calm that had accompanied me since the night before. On the other end, Landon's voice thundered like lightning. They stole my car. I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting his desperation bounce in my ears. Then I replied clearly, "It wasn't your car, son. It was mine. I only lent it to you. Yesterday, I had it towed back and it's already in my garage." A short silence, followed by a roar of rage. "How could you? You're a mean, vengeful woman after everything I've done for you." I bit my tongue to keep from letting out a bitter laugh. Him, for me. Before I could respond, I heard Tatum's voice in the background. She snatched the phone and spat with venom. "Resentful old hag, you ruined your own son. No one mocks their family like this without paying." I leaned back in the chair, looking at the window where the morning light streamed in. Their words no longer had the power to hurt me. They sounded hollow, like stones thrown against a solid wall. The times of abusing me are over, I thought. I took a deep breath and, with the same serenity I used to lecture on literature, replied, "I won't argue over the phone anymore. Today at 5 in the afternoon, I expect you here, in my apartment, the three of us. Time to settle accounts." I gave no room for replies. I hung up with a click that tasted like freedom. I went to the table, opened my blue-covered notebook, and wrote slowly, with firm handwriting, "Today, 5 p.m. Definitive meeting." Then I closed the notebook and placed it on the stack of file cabinets. The clock still showed 7:50, but I was no longer the same woman who'd endured humiliations in silence. That hour etched itself in my memory as the start of my new destiny. At 5 on the dot, I heard the sharp knocks on the door. I opened it calmly. There they were, Landon with his jaw clenched, Tatum with that look that always seems to size up the terrain before attacking. I invited them in. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee. But the dining table offered no cookies or smiles, only thick folders, perfectly aligned. They sat reluctantly. I opened the first folder and spread the papers in front of them. "Here are the deposits I made every month to cover your late rents," I said, without raising my voice. "More than $10,000 over 5 years." I moved to the next. "Here, the transfers for tuition and emergencies. And here, the charges on your additional card dinners at luxury restaurants, trips to Miami and Maui, designer bags that never made it to my hands. All on my card." Landon turned red like a child caught red-handed. He looked down, clenching his fists. Tatum, on the other hand, didn't take long to counterattack. "This is humiliating. You're exposing us like criminals." I leaned forward, with the serenity that comes from having the truth in hand. "I'm not exposing you. You exposed yourselves, year after year, with every receipt that appears here." The tension cut the air. Then, I pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen, and the silence filled with an unmistakable image, the restaurant's security video. There, in high definition, Was Landon raising the glass and throwing the wine on me? While Tatum smiled complacently, the file had been provided by Callum Monroe, the manager, an old acquaintance who didn't hesitate to help when he learned what happened. No one said anything, not a murmur, not an excuse. The color drained from my son's face, and Tatum looked away, seeking an escape that didn't exist. I turned off the screen and put the tablet away with a slow, almost ceremonial movement. "And this is just the beginning," I said, letting each word fall like a stone on the silence. I didn't give them time to recover from the video's blow. I took another folder, different, wine-colored. I opened it carefully and placed it in front of them. "I'm no longer your financial lifeline," I said calmly. 3 months ago, I transferred a large part of my savings and my property in Salem, Massachusetts, to the Breyer Foundation, an institution that offers scholarships to young writers. Landon's eyes widened like saucers. Tatum arched her eyebrows, incredulous. "What are you saying?" he blurted, almost voiceless. I pulled out the notarized deed with stamps and signatures. "Here it is all. In the notary, I stipulated that you can't touch a single dollar. What I built with my life already has a destination. And it's not you." The silence lasted barely an instant. Landon slammed the table with his fist. "You left us on the street after everything we gave for you." I stared at him. I saw in his face not just rage, but also the fear of facing the void without my support. Tatum, meanwhile, straightened her back and shot with venom. "You stole our inheritance. That belongs to us." I looked her straight in the eyes, without blinking. Inheritance isn't stolen. It's given or not given. And I've already decided to give it to those who will value it. The air in the room grew thick. Landon gritted his teeth, trying to hold back. Tatum gripped his arm tightly, as if wanting to use him as a shield, but the pressure between them was noticeable. Her rage wasn't just toward me, also toward the man sitting beside her, who hadn't known how to secure the comfortable life he promised. I leaned over the table and closed the folders with a sharp snap. "What you had with me is over. What comes next depends solely on you." As I looked up, I saw the crack. Small, but clear. Tatum glared at him. Landon avoided her eyes. The couple looked at each other with contained fury, as if suddenly understanding that the enemy wasn't just in front of them, but also at their side. That fissure, I thought, wouldn't take long to widen. I didn't have to say more. Showing the documents was enough for the bomb to explode on its own. Landon turned to Tatum, his eyes blazing. "You told me my mother would never dare leave us out. That it was just a matter of enduring her outbursts," he reproached, slapping the table with his open palm. Tatum leaned toward him, with that scornful smile I'd seen so many times. "And whose fault is it you, who never knew how to secure a decent income, always depending on your mom's checkbook? What did you expect, that she'd gift you everything like you were an eternal child?" He turned red, like when he was a teenager caught in a lie. "You manipulated me," he spat. "You filled my head with ideas, that it was my right, that she had to support us." The crossfire of accusations became a whirlwind. I watched in silence. With my hands clasped on the table, I didn't need to intervene. The family was crumbling on its own, poisoned by its own ambition. Their rage wasn't really against me, but the reflection of a life built on excuses. I waited for their shouts to fade into an uncomfortable silence. Then I spoke. With a firm but serene voice, "I'm not punishing you. This isn't my whim. This is the consequence of years of abuse, of years of asking from me and never thanking, of years of treating me as your endless backup." Landon blinked several times. as if my words were a harder blow to take than his wife's reproaches. Tatum averted her gaze, crossed her arms, unable to hold the scene. For the first time in a long time, I felt my voice didn't tremble. They fell silent, the room filled with that heavy, uncomfortable silence that forces you to look inward. Then Landon, with a thread of a voice that reminded me of the child who once held my hand in elementary school, whispered almost childishly, "And now what will we do, Mom?" When they left, the echo of the door closing left me with a solitude that weighed more than any insult. I sat for a long time in the living room, looking at the stacked file cabinets like mute witnesses. I felt a hollow in my chest. Not of regret, but of grief. It was grief for the compliant mother I'd been, for the woman who'd so often chosen to silence herself and yield to avoid fights. How many nights I'd muted my voice just to maintain a false peace. I stood up slowly and opened the windows. Outside, Echo Park buzzed with its traffic and voices, but inside me reigned a new silence. Different. Almost liberating. I put water on to boil, prepared chamomile tea, and sat on the balcony with the hot cup between my hands. For the first time in a long time, I thought of myself, not them. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my reverie. It was my neighbor and friend, Briar Rosewood, a woman with white hair tied in a bun, who always has wise words wrapped in simplicity. She sat with me, looked at the stained dress still hanging on the coat rack, and said, without beating around the bush, "You weren't buying affection, Ilara. You were buying silence. Now, no more." Her words pierced me like a knife, but also like medicine. I realized in a flash that she was right. My money never generated love. It only silenced mouths. We spent a good while talking about books, about the life I still had left. And there, between sips of tea, the idea was born. Why not open my personal library as a community space? I had shelves full of literature that could inspire young people from the neighborhood. I could organize workshops, readings, writing circles. I needed no more permission than my own will. With that thought, I felt light, almost excited. I stood up, took a clean notebook, and began jotting down planned schedules, possible topics, names of authors who could illuminate others. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated on the table. A short, unexpected message. "Mom, I need to talk." Just me. Landon. The next afternoon, I heard 3 timid knocks on my door. Upon opening, I found Landon alone, without his usual arrogance, without Tatum's expensive perfume clinging to his clothes. He had sunken eyes, dark circles like shadows from sleepless nights, and slumped shoulders like someone no longer trying to uphold a facade. He entered slowly, as if fearing rejection, before crossing the threshold. He sat on the couch across from me, wringing his hands. A few seconds passed before his voice came out broken. "She left. Mom." Tatum left me. She took what little was left. There was a dense silence, barely broken by the tick-tock of the wall clock. I didn't respond right away. I observed him calmly, recognizing in his posture not the insolent man who'd thrown wine on me in Beverly Hills, but the lost child I'd once cared for with sleepless nights. Landon took a deep breath and, against what I expected, didn't ask for money. He lowered his head and said with a sincerity that surprised me, "I don't want you to give me anything. I want advice. How do I start from zero?" I felt a knot in my throat, a mix of sadness and relief. I approached, placed my hand over his, and spoke firmly. "You start with dignity. Get a real job, even if it's simple. Stop waiting for rescues. Because no one can save someone who doesn't save themselves. He looked up, and in his eyes I saw a different spark. As if he'd finally understood what I'd tried to teach him so many times. He nodded slowly. Swallowing hard, we stayed silent for a moment. And then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I shook his hand. With strength and serenity. It was a small gesture, but inside me it felt enormous. For the first time in a long time, my son seemed to truly listen to me. Some months passed, and my life took a direction I never imagined at 72 years old, in Salem, where I'd inherited that old family house. I opened the doors of my personal library and turned it into a community workshop. The young people from the neighborhood started arriving shyly, some with old notebooks, others with nothing more than a desire to listen. Soon they called me Prof, with an affection that moved me. I, who once thought I'd finished my role in teaching upon retiring from UCLA, discovered I could still plant something new, and those seeds, in the form of stories, poems, and shared readings, began to bloom in those young voices that dared to dream. Meanwhile, Landon also embarked on a different path. One day he wrote to me from Louisville, "I don't earn much, but it's mine. I work as a manager in a bookstore. For the first time, I feel like I'm good for something." I read those words several times, with tears blurring my glasses. It wasn't wealth, but a beginning. And that beginning was worth more than any dollar I'd ever given him. Weeks later, I received an unexpected envelope in my mailbox. Upon opening it, I found $250 neatly arranged. Accompanying it was a note in his messy handwriting, "For your workshop. Mom, thanks for not giving up on me." I held those bills like they were gold. Not for the amount, but because they were the fruit of his effort, of real work, of recovered dignity. My next birthday arrived. There were no expensive restaurants or designer dresses. Instead, the workshop room was full of students and some old friends who'd accompanied my steps. With a glass of wine in hand, I looked around and felt that the emptiness from before no longer existed. I raised the glass and, with a clear voice, said, "They didn't take anything from me. I chose what to give and to whom." That birthday ended differently from all the previous ones. There were no costly gifts or banquets where smiles were feigned, only young voices sharing poems, laughter filling the room, and grateful looks for a space that now belonged to them too. While washing the glasses after the gathering, I thought about how far I'd come since that night in Beverly Hills. When Landon threw the wine on me, I believed, in that moment, that my life was collapsing. But no, what really happened was that a door finally opened. I discovered that freedom doesn't consist in cutting off those who hurt you at the root, but in learning to set clear boundaries. Even if they hurt, that was the hardest lesson, to stop confusing love with sacrifice, support with servitude. I learned that it's not about abandoning anyone, but about not abandoning myself. Today, I look at Landon from another angle. He's not the child I always had to rescue, but a man who, at last, is trying to stand on his own hands. I don't know how far he'll go, but now I understand that his path doesn't depend on my pockets or my silences. I stepped out onto the balcony that night. The fresh air of Salem reminded me that every stage has its own shine, even old age. And I smiled. The burden of the past no longer weighed on me, because I'd chosen what to carry with me and what to leave behind. I took my glass of wine, the last one of that day, and in a low voice toasted with myself, "Sometimes, to keep your place in life, it's not enough to defend the chair. You have to learn to set your own table." And upon hearing those words resonate in the solitude of my room, I knew that, for the first time in many years, that table was mine,